Discover prototypical track and turnouts with the Roadmaster series from Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply. Proudly made in the United States, Oak Hill's handcrafted turnouts provide unparalleled detail and accuracy, giving your layout museum-quality track work at an affordable price. Whether fully built or in easy-to-assemble kit form, Roadmaster provides all the details of real track. Looking for a custom piece of track work? Oak Hill can help with custom turnouts, diamonds, crossings, and more. Check out all of their offerings on their website, ohrtracksupply.com. Hey, do you like free stuff? As a member of the operating crew, you'll get a chance to win awesome prizes each month. For less than $10 a day, you'll be entered to win, and just as important, your support helps keep every episode from behind a paywall and free of those unrelated and annoying commercials you hear on other podcasts. Sign up today at aroundthelayout.com/crew, and thank you for your support.
ATLP Rewind.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining me once again, you know him as our executive producer here at Around the Layout, and contractually obligated to bring him on every 50 episodes or so. Coming to us from Sydney, Australia, Paul Cassar. Paul, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ray, boss. Good to be back. Hard to believe it's been over 50 episodes since I appeared back in May of 22, and what fun we've had since then in spreading the word and building such a great podcast.
I was going to say we've grown quite a podcast since then, and a lot of work that's gone into the both of us, and you've been a huge help to that, and we'll talk about that a bit later because you've been a key component to our growth, and we'll chat about that. But I'm interested in getting you to get everybody up to speed on what's been going on in your modeling life, because boy, you've been awful busy. You've got your model railroad, you've been doing some socializing stuff, you've had people over to the layout, and then you've got the shelf modelers group that you're all responsible for. So we got a lot to catch up on, but why don't we roll right into it? Let me ask you, because I've been seeing so many different projects from you. Tell us, why don't you get everybody up to speed first on your layout? And for those that may not have seen episode 4, listen to episode 4, why don't you tell them a bit more about it?
Sure. So it's a switching layout, shelf layout, of course. In my garage, it's around about 18 feet by 18 feet, or for us metric people, it's around about 6 meters by 6 meters. So it goes along 2 walls. Loose. I'm a proto freelancer, loosely around the Kansas area where MKT and Norfolk Western and the Mopac meet and interchange on an industrial line that serves a brewery and a printing plant and a couple of silos. So plenty of action. It has 30 spots for switching. So any one of my sessions, you're switching around about 25 cars on the layout, and then I have 4 interchanges. So cars come on and off via the interchange, off layout. So that really opens up your operating capability, and you can basically switch anything on and off the layout. You don't necessarily have to stick to what you've got, Mopac or whatever. And I have lots of cars come on and off, roughly around about 300 cars I have. Not growing, I'm trying to stay with that. and I've probably been changing my locomotive roster over the last 18 months from EMD to mainly Alco, because I love Alcos. But I still do have a number of Jeeps for Mopac, and recently an RS18U that I only just received last week. I had it weathered by Rob from Weather My Trains, which is just an outstanding model. I was really pleased with how that came out. So lots of action, and as you're saying, I've had a number of people come and visit. One of my layout was an open layout for the local NMRA convention here in Sydney that was held in late September. Had about 10 modelers come and visit, a couple of master model railroaders, which was really good because they gave me some good feedback, which I've taken on. But it's the more people come, the more I appreciate the feedback I receive because in the past I'm a bit of a lone wolf, tend to model, operate and model myself. So it's good when you do get people come and either give you positive feedback or feedback where you can improve. So that's been really worthwhile, and I encourage anyone who has a layout to have people come over and operate and enjoy it and get the feedback. So what I tend to do is if I've got anyone who operates, I'll either be conductor or if there's two people, I just let them go for it and I just stand in the background and assist or offer advice. But I get more enjoyment of that. And I notice a few modelers do that. That when they have an operating session, they don't actually operate. And it's good to stand back and watch others operate the layout.
It's kind of a weird feeling, isn't it, when you first let somebody start operating your layout and you take that step back, and especially the first time, it's just a very strange feeling. At least it was for me. I'm not sure how was it for you that first time you had handed a throttle over.
I think there's a little bit of anxiety because you want the layout to operate reliable. That's probably my key thing about my layout that needs to be reliable, needs to operate. So, you worry that something's going to happen. You might have something, an issue. I had an issue with my proto throttle that I hadn't come across before, but we quickly resolved that. But other than that, I really enjoy it. And the feedback, was always positive, and people really enjoy. I had Gary Rooming over last week and Michael Neal, both from my modelling group, and they operated together. And I said to Michael came in from New Zealand, and I asked him what he thought from what he'd seen of the layout to seeing it in person, and he said it's just exactly how I expected, and it operated how I expected. So, and they ran two sessions, so they switched probably 50 odd cars on the layout in about a 3.5 hour, 4 hour session. So I really, really took a lot out of that. It was really enjoyable, and I enjoy to see other people enjoy the layout.
It's a pretty amazing number that you just mentioned there, that the operating, how long did you say, 3 to 4 hours that they were operating your layout?
Yeah.
Wow.
So each session takes around. So I have four local trains that come in and operate and switch the layout, and they operated two sessions. So that's around 4 hours, and they were both. So I think the first time Michael was the engineer and Gary was the conductor, and the second they swapped. Then Gary was the engineer and Michael was the conductor. But I told Michael it'd be an expensive visit because as soon as he used the proto throttle, he'd be pretty much wrapped in it, and that he was. Really, really enjoyed using the proto throttle.
I got one put in my hands down in Texas at David Hyde's MKT layout, and it was exhilarating and nerve wracking at the same time. Exhilarating because it was so cool to run. I mean, he's got a great layout, and I was thrilled to run it and then be able to use a proto throttle, but also kind of nerve wracking and a little bit of resistance because once you use one, you want one so bad. And I'll tell you, I'm still itching for a proto throttle because I think it'd be a lot of fun on my switching layout. And it sounds like it's made yours that much more enjoyable.
Oh, it adds another level to operating. If you really want to operate, the proto throttle is just another layer
Yes.
of realism. And I think I've said before, it adds around 50% of operating time. And once you get that, once you learn it, and once you use it, you won't want to use a normal dial or any other type of throttle, which is interesting with the advent of the Blue Nami chip and people using their phones. I've got the Wi-Fi adapter for phones. I don't use it. It just doesn't seem realistic to me. Fantastic, you can use your phone, and if you've got multiple people in a large layout, then you're not having to purchase a lot of throttles. But it's just not realistic for me, and the Proto throttle adds that level of realism. So Blue Nami, if I was Scott Thornton and Mike and the team from higher engineering, I would really look at a Bluetooth version of the proto throttle in the future to allow people with Bunami decoders to use a proto throttle, basically dead rail, which would be fantastic. I think that's the future. Certainly, if you want to go into garden railways and things like that.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, if it can be done and it's on the forefront, I'm sure Iowa Scaled Engineering's got it on their radar. But I'm kind of mixed feeling about the phone. I've used the phone to operate for the first time down in Texas at the Texas Northern Club. And I mean, what it is, I guess there's some pros and cons to it. Like you said, the pro being that it's easier to get in because now you have basically anybody that has a phone has a throttle. But on the other hand, I kind of like putting my phone away when I operate too. Like I don't want to take calls. I don't want to see Facebook updates. I don't want to see pictures of people's cats. I don't want to do any of that. Right. I want to be able to focus on operating. So there's definitely some pros and cons to that, but it is a lot of fun when you get that proto throttle in your hand.
Yeah, I agree. When I use my phone at home, because I've got my wireless network and then the throttle network, sometimes it'll disconnect off the throttle and I'd lose control because it's reconnected to my home network. So, and I'm sure there's a fix around that. But yeah, look, I don't criticise anyone who uses a phone. I think it's another addition
Yeah.
to the hobby. My preference is because I've used a proto throttle that there's nothing else I use actually.
Yeah, when you have that, it's hard to replace it. But so I want to go back a little bit. And by the way, we're 11 minutes into recording. How are we doing this time versus the last time, Paul?
Well, the first time, and that was episode 4. So I think we were talking for about 15 minutes. And then you realise that you hadn't hit the record button, so we had to start all again, which was quite an experience trying to recall what we've been speaking about and trying to recapture it. So I think you've hit the record button this time, which is so we've moved on since then.
Yeah, I've about 50 other more episodes to practice hitting the record button before we start. So I'm getting pretty good at it. Although I have created a checklist now to make sure that I get this all done. But yeah, that was quite a learning experience on episode 4. Rookie mistake of, I thought I had everything taken care of, got you connected for all the way to Sydney, Australia. And I was like, oh, this is good. And we started talking and I looked down and then it like panic set in for a few minutes because I was looking up at the screen like, oh, I didn't like, is there any hope of saving this? And then, by the time I figured, then I was like, hey, Paul, you got to stop. We're not recording. So, but then you couldn't keep it a secret. You had to go tell Don Iris. And the next thing I know, my phone's blowing up and Don's, busting on me about it. So it makes it a lot easier to remember to hit the record button now. I always remember back to episode 4 and those little mistakes, whether you're model railroading or podcasting or anything else, though, there is a learning curve, and you were certainly a part of that learning curve that night.
I think there's been a lot of learning on the podcast and how far the podcast has gone, and people underestimate the amount of work you put in doing all the editing. The interviews, the fun part, it's all the background editing, which I know you do take some time. And of course, the research and the research we do in finding participants, those who want to be interviewed. And, that's something I enjoy doing is the background research and working with you, discussing the podcast and taking it forward. And I think, it's up there with the best. I think it's got a great future.
Well, I appreciate it. And you're certainly a part of that. And one of the reasons why it's worked so well with our relationship is when you have a podcast that's just yourself, you always need a sounding board. And you've been that sounding board for me many of time of, whether it be, talking about a guest or talking about the process or talking about marketing or talking about any of the aspects that go into the podcast. You certainly have been there. Although I've had to set my phone, on my Apple phone, I have 2 clocks. I have the New York time zone clock and the Sydney time zone clock to make sure I don't wake you up in the middle of the night. But it's been great. And one thing that's been fun, and you kind of kick it off too. I mean, I have you helping me. We're both small layout owners. We don't own massive empires. And, and I think what's helped with that is I think that we think differently to the type of guest we want on. And we've had such a great variety of guests. From people that have great notoriety and all the way down to people people may have never heard of before. And every single one of them's got an unbelievable story to tell about their model railroading journey. And you've helped me find those folks.
And I think that's the real advantage of the podcast is, you've got those who are well known across the hobby, and then there's a lot of people out there who are doing great work who don't get that recognition. And we've had some incredible people on the podcast, and more to come. You and I have had many a conversation about who we'd like to have on, and to the credit, most are really happy to come on and share their story. And I've learned a lot from those who've been interviewed on different facets of the hobby. And as we was talking earlier about my layout, lately I've been getting back into airbrushing, which is something that I used to be quite hesitant to do. But I got myself a new dual action and been using Tamiya and isopropyl, which I hadn't used before.
Mm-hmm.
And it just flows so well. I'm learning to do a little bit of weathering using airbrushing, but also just painting up structures and things like that. And what I am doing in my layout is what I have been doing the last 6 months is going back with the original Walters structures and modifying, putting additional piping, conduits, that type of thing. So anyone can do that. It's quite easy. Get yourself a pack of styrene, of tubing, or whatever size, and just look at buildings. I sometimes do that when I go past commuting on the train. I'll look at an industry. Oh yeah, look, you can put that pipe, run that pipe down the side. So just adding those things to your structure and then repainting the structures, it changes the whole look of the layout. So, and I think as you become more mature in your layout, you start looking back at what you did earlier and thinking, nah, I could do that better, or I could make a change. I've got a structure on my layout that's very common, and I see it on many layouts, so I've gone back and modified it so it doesn't look exactly like the others. And there's nothing wrong with buying a structure out of the box and assembling it. That's what I did. I just think as you get more mature and as you get more experience, you tend to start to want to do different things. So, I did my big scratch built warehouse this year, and okay, credit to Boomer, I copied his process, but it gave me the confidence to have a go and do it myself, and I was really pleased with the outcome. So, the old adage people say, "Oh, my layout's finished." Well, your layout's never finished.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what level of detail you want to put into the layout. So, and I call that layering.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that you've really hit on here is you're talking about all these projects you're doing. We'll get into them a little bit more. By having a smaller layout, and I'm not saying anything about bigger layouts, but when you know and you know the time you have and you know your interest, and when you're able to encapsulate that into an 18 by 18 layout, now you've given yourself the opportunity. If you were building anything bigger, you would have to basically keep going and kind of forget it and keep going. But now that you've got this smaller layout, now you can drill down on these super details and change structures without feeling like you're getting behind, or and continuously have that updating thing. And as your skills develop, so do, like you said, okay, I could do this better, or I could lay this track better. Maybe I'll pull this section up and redo this. Or now it gives you time to focus on the super details of your locomotives and those kinds of things. So you've been able to really drill into what you're capable of doing. You know your why, and your layout reflects that.
Yeah, and that's really true. I've added lighting, I've added sound to my road crossings. So it's just those little details. When people look at your layout, they come, or you post on social media, you start seeing another level of detail, and to me, that's what it's about. Going back to a section that you think's finished, and even improving that even more. And the beauty about that is, one weekend you can be weathering a locomotive. You can be. Recently, I built a small electrical yard with a transformer
Right.
into an area that I'd always planned to do something. And, that entailed I had an Atlas transformer kit, which I put together. Then I painted with the airbrush and then built a yard, put fencing around it, and then install it on the layout. Just that, quite an enjoyable little project, and it's not taking months. In a weekend, I'd completed it and put it on the layout. And maybe the next weekend I'm free, I've got round about 5 or 6 cars that need weathering, so I'll spend some time weathering them.
Right.
So many aspects, and I think the danger where people tend to go stale is where it's such a big task to do. Let's say you've got to do all scenery, and if you've got so much to do, it gets very difficult because it's just such a huge task. Whereas on a smaller layout, you can focus on one area and have it finished in a day.
Right.
And I see so many shelf layouts in the group, and just amazing, and so many people building, let's say, 8 feet by 1 foot,
Mm-hmm.
1.5 meters by about 300 mil layouts, and they just look spectacular.
Yeah.
And that if you want to take some good photos and some good scenes, you don't need a large layout. You can just have a small shelf layout that you can use to take incredible scenes with.
Yeah, and you talk about that small, layout, and obviously with you again, with able to drill home those details. One thing that you've been pivotal in is a group to share all that information in, the HO Scale Shelf Modelers group. And the last time we checked, and we were talking about it in May, it was at 9,000, a little over 9,000. Where are you at now, Paul?
So 2 days ago, we passed 17,000
Amazing.
members in the group, and it'd be nice if all those people participated, but they're obviously there looking.
Yeah.
But some of the modelers we have there are just amazing, and we've interviewed a number of those, and we'll continue to identify those that we want to interview on the podcast.
Right.
But shelf layouts is, and we hear it across social media, seems to be, I wouldn't say emerging, it's probably emerged as one of the, I would say, largest group of modelers in model railroading now.
Yeah.
Because space is at a limit, more people living in apartments, not many houses, or certainly in my country, in Australia, have basements, and space is very precious. So having just one wall that enables you to have a small shelf layout, or a modular layout. And modular, I think, is really what having a modular shelf layout is the future, the way I see it. Now, mine's a fixed layout, of course, but if I was building again, I'd have to consider a modular shelf layout, because you could then take it and connect to other people,
Yeah.
and increase the length of your layout. And Gary Rooming, as you know, is a good friend of mine, has done similar, where he has a modular shelf layout and took it to our convention and allowed people to operate his layout. And it was a highlight of the convention, really, because people were amazed to see how they could take it out of a room and set it up quite simply. So our future project that Gary and I are looking at doing is building a prototype layout, modular layout, for an exhibition.
Yeah, and it's great to be able to do that with a modular layout, and even shelf layouts. I'll go back a little bit here. You mentioned space. It's also time, and knowing what kind of time you can devote to it. And I think to both of those, as life gets busier, life seems to be a lot more complicated lately, and just so many other things pulling our attention one way or the other. And if you're one of those, or you're like me, you've got a young family where I can't really drill on doing a massive layout, nor can I negotiate right now for the real estate to do what I want to do. It's it's keeping me in the hobby, and it's keeping me, and I think that's happening for a lot of people. And I think that group speaks for it. 17,000 people have joined, not like you said, not as many active, but they're watching, they're looking, and they're seeing stuff. And in that you're spreading that word out to the community that it can be done.
It is. It's a great group. It's only people say, "Oh, Paul, you've done a great job," but really, any group's as good as those who participate, and that's what it's more about. And it's about encouraging people to put up what they've done, let people see. To get ideas. I've got many an idea from what I've seen on the group, and I always encourage people to accept feedback. Now, and I've spoken about this before, but all feedback's good. It just is up to what you decide to do with that feedback.
Right.
You can accept it. You can decide, yep, that's good feedback, but I'm not going to take that on. Or you know what, that is really good feedback. I am going to do something about that. So the more feedback, and I don't like using the term negative because I don't believe any feedback's negative. It may not be what you like or agree with, but it's still feedback that you should at least think about. So I always encourage people to give me feedback when I post on the group. I think that's the only way to improve is to receive feedback on your work.
Oh, for sure. And, there's always a takeaway from interaction and, feedback from people, or feedback when they come and operate, or feedback when you share your layout or share pictures on social media. There's just many ways that you can connect. And I say it quite a few times on the podcast, the hobby is so much better shared in whichever way or whichever avenues you choose to share it is certainly better than keeping it to yourself, because it really is a great community to share it within. And we've been able to connect with so many people through groups and podcasts, and, the social interaction that's come with both has just been phenomenal. So you got a little bit of a modular project going, and then you're super detailing this. I got to ask you about that. It's been a question I been sticking in my mind going back to that transformer. Did you put it on a flat and transport it over there, or did you use the hand of God to carry it?
Use the hand of God to carry it. I must admit.
Come on, Paul. You had an opportunity to run an extra over there
Well, that's
to bring the
true. That's
transformer
true.
over with some pictures. I expect
I do
more of
have a
you, Paul.
second. I may have to do that, but I don't think I have any flat cars anymore. I used to have some flats, but I sold them. But I do have a spare transformer, so you never know.
There you
You
go.
never know.
There you go.
You may see that posted. But one thing I was going to say about the group was, you'll get a new person, or all of a sudden some person will post their layout, and you go, "Wow, where did that come from?"
Yeah.
Not seen that before.
Yep.
And I've seen some absolutely incredible work, and the group's growing to, majority would be US, but we're getting some European members
Yeah.
posting as well, and it's good to see what other people around the world are doing. Like the UK, from my experience, is a large modelling community, and they're probably the leaders in shelf layouts. They've been doing it for a long time because of space.
Right.
They don't have the big houses, or the land area.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of great shelf layouts there. Of course, there's some huge layouts as well, but a lot of shelf layouts which are quite good.
Right. Yeah. What it also fascinates me, and I think I mentioned this, and I've mentioned it before, and I'll bring it up again. The amount of layouts that are outside the United States that are modeling the United States railroads. And yours is
Yep.
another example of that. Why don't you tell us again about that? Because I'm sure there's more to it than what we covered in episode 4. And I just find that fascinating that, that you've been to the United States, and you've seen the country, but you never lived here. And, your connection and then you pick railroads in some fallen flags to model too. So there's something really, there's a neat aspect to that.
So my modelling, as a child, I guess my earliest recollection was a book that I was given, and it had a Union Pacific E8 on the front of it. And I wish I could work out where that book was or what book it was, so I get another copy. And I think that was embedded in me when I when I saw that book, and it was on about railroads. It was prototypical, and because my trains has been my love, I guess, for all my life. When I started my career, it took me into the railways. But because I'm working on prototypical in Sydney, New South Wales, I didn't want to model it. And there was a couple of reasons. One is there wasn't a lot of Australian models available. And the second reason was, well, because I'm working on it, I didn't really want to be reminded of it in my spare time. And because I'd loved American railroads and the big locomotives and steam trains to a point, it was just natural for me to model US railroads. Coming towards the end of my career, I am starting to look towards an Australian and New South Wales prototype shelf layout as well,
Yeah.
which means a modular type. So I'm not talking about rebuilding and changing out my US layout, the Riverbelt line. It'll be a small number of modules that will be prototypical of a certain area that Gary and I are still looking at, that we can then build modules and we can show them at different shows. So that's the plan. So I've bought a couple of New South Wales locomotives, and not much rolling stock yet, but that's my retirement plan, and it'll be the first time that I fully model scratch build prototypically. So we're looking at an area in Sydney which is the Botany line, which is where the ports are. But there's Kellogg's factory's been there since the early 90s, 1900s. So my interest is to photograph that building, quite a large building,
Yeah.
and scratch build it and make that the key part of a module.
That's great.
And being in, I've got the original signalling plans, track layouts over the years
Yeah.
from our rail archives.
Right.
So we can build that very, very, very close. But Gary's also looking at another area which is called the Sandown line, which is also in the middle of Sydney, where there used to be an oil refinery
Mm-hmm.
and a number of large industries. So that's another choice that we're looking at, because they used to run a workers train in the morning and afternoon, which was a suburban train under catenary that used
Mm-hmm.
to go out there to take the workers and pick them up. So that gives another aspect of modelling that Gary would like to do. So we're looking at both areas, and we're looking at it, which is, or we may even combine, have one end being Sandown, the other end being Botany. So I like the idea of it, and I like to plan, and I like to research. So that's a great little project. And then we'll talk about what the modules will look like. They need to be long, not long. They need to be a length that I can put in a car.
Right.
So that and I only have a sedan. So that's what I need to think about. And how do you build it to the Fremo standard, or do Gary's got his own design that he's built his layout on. So I'm pretty sure he'd probably want to stick with that,
Right.
so that he can add it to his own layout. So yeah, watch your space, I guess. Early days, but I'm fairly sure that we'll do something at some stage.
It certainly sounds like you're excited about getting another project underway and, going back. And I think it kind of speaks to that too. Like you talked about layouts never being done, but I get the urge too. And my layout is at a point where I've laid most of my track. I mean, I could make some track changes, but I go back to itch to back to the beginning. Like I'd love to be able to go back to the beginning and do this again, or because it's a progression, right? Once you have that done, like once you build the bench work, it's done. And then once you lay track, it's done. But it's always fun because you hone those skills, and about the time you get good at it, you're done. So it's fun to do that again. It sounds like that's where you're going back to.
It's true. And I can understand now why some modelers build multiple layouts, because as they learn, they go to the next level.
Yeah.
So if my next layout, when I start, I will be commencing at a much higher level than when I commence my current layout,
Right.
because I've learned so much building that, scenery, and I I think my next layout would not have a Walters kit on it. That everything would be a scratch-built building or a highly modified kit building. So, and I would have never thought of doing that in the past. So, and because YouTube and there's a lot of tutorials now more available, you're able to get those skills a lot sooner. So, I think for me, I would be scratch building nearly every building. I think that's scratch building once you get the itch for it, it can become highly addictive. It's a hobby within a hobby. We've
Sure.
spoken about that. Podcasting's a hobby within a hobby.
Right.
But I got a lot, when I built my first scratch built building, the warehouse. And I tell people this story. When I was presenting at the NMRA convention in Sydney, I spoke about building this, my first scratch built building. And a key assumption I used was the styrene, which was by Evergreen, of course.
Yep.
And the sheeting is, let's just say, 6 inches by 3-inch sheet. And I was cutting them in half to make the sides of the warehouse. So in metric, they have 300 mil sheets. So I think they were 150 in half. So I've cut all the sheets and I'm laying them down, and some have got windows and doors. But as I lay them down, I realise that they're a bit wider than what they were supposed to be. So they were running out. That I was going to have a narrower panel. And then when I went back and checked, the actual styrene sheets weren't 300 mil; they were 308. So I'd cut them in half, of course, but instead of being 150, they were about 154. So after about 5 or 6 panels, there's an inch that I'd lost
Yep.
because I'd assumed that they were cut to the correct dimensions. So I don't point it out, but if you ever look at photos of the warehouse I scratch built, there's a panel hid in there that's not as wide as all the others because I had to make a correction. So that's a lessons learned. Don't assume that when you buy material that it's to the dimensions that's on the pack, because I got caught.
It sounds like the not hit the record button version of scratch building, isn't it? the rookie
Absolutely,
mistakes, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I that mistake or that assumption was so early in the process that I was caught by it, and it wasn't even when I had the sheets on the workbench. I'd actually glued them onto the wooden structure as my final structure, so I was committed then,
Right.
But I corrected it, and I really love the look of the warehouse. I'm really proud that was my first attempt at scratch building. But now I want to do more. And, I've got like telegraph poles on the layout, which were Atlas. I plan to scratch build my own and make my own poles. And, that's just it's more detail to go in the layout. So, yeah, definitely if you're out there thinking about having a go, build something small, build a shed. Just buy a little bit of styrene and have a go building a shed and painting it and putting it on, because realistically, it's the only one in the world because you've built it. And that's, as I said, I do find it a little bit now. I see structures the same as mine on other layouts, and I think, yeah, I need to replace mine.
And sometimes it's hard. Like when I look at mine and, I think that stuff comes in waves, doesn't it, Paul? Like you get like into something, like you were into weathering your locomotives, and then you go on that, and then next thing, the wave of scratch building, and now you want to do it's just funny. It's not like just one. It's like, it seems like it's like, oh, I'm on a kick, right? I'm on a kick of decaling cars, or I'm on a kick of it, and it's just amazing how those waves happen, and then what kicks them off, and then what you decide to do while you're in that wave where you never thought you were going to do something. Then all of a sudden you're looking at another structure and deciding, oops, time for that one to go because I want to scratch build something else.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of the hobby. It's whatever you make of it. What do you want to do? Some modelers will never think about scratch building a building. Others love scenery. Others love putting, signaling and block detection and control panels on their layout. And for me, that's not what I want to do. I do that prototypically. For me, it's about realism, having a layout operate realistically, and it doesn't have to look perfect. Mine's nowhere near perfect, and I'm inspired by those who, to me, are perfection. You know, Tom Johnson, who we've had on around the layout before. You look at the scenes that he posts, and they're just truly amazing.
They
You
are.
know, it's that level that you aspire to. Not everybody's going to get to, and there's nothing wrong with that. But to see those, that inspires me to do better. And Tom regularly posts on the group and other places, and it's just an inspirational layout, and it's not a big layout. It's quite a small shelf layout.
Tom Johnson is really the example of what model railroaders should be, and especially what I call exceptional model railroaders like Tom Johnson. I sent him an email back when I was looking to do some trees because he's got some beautiful trees on his layout.
Yeah.
And all I was looking for was a shopping list. Like, hey, Tom, tell me what you're using for your leaves and so on. Not only did Tom give me a shopping list, Tom gave me an entire dissertation, paragraphs long, in an email. He took the time to put all of this information and share it with me so that, and it wasn't like this idea. Like sometimes you get this idea that people do great things and they're never going to tell you so that they can protect it.
Yeah.
Not Tom Johnson. Yeah. He'll tell you exactly how he's done it. And so that your layout looks just as good as his. You really feel like he's one of those guys that wants to share that information. And we run into so many people that are like that just can't wait to help somebody make their layout great. And that's what's really, really awesome about the people in this hobby.
I totally agree. And I've had help from Don Iris, of course, that you and I are both friends with. He's always good for electrical. I've got problems with my proto throttle or DCC issues. He's great for that.
Absolutely.
And there's plenty of other people on the group who also are good to reach out to. And I'm happy for people to reach out to me if I can help. That's what it's about. It's that companionship. And the podcast that we work on is all about building that. It's about building the hobby. We do it to really encourage others to get into modelling, and I think the hobby is growing, and I think that more are finding it enjoyable. And you don't need to spend a lot of money. Yes, the cost of locomotives and cars and that now are just I can't believe the price of some, and I understand why. But if you have a small shelf layout, one locomotive and four cars is all you need if you want. It's a good entry into the hobby. And blue boxes are still around, and I actually enjoy sometimes finding cars and repainting and doing that type of stuff. So
yeah,
as much as the new, and I'm guilty of buying home shop rolling stock. I've got quite a number of them. Chris tends to message me and yeah, okay, Chris. So what do you got?
He
did
knows
buy,
what he's doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did purchase two of Tom Johnson's Cass County cars, box cars, which now operate on the layout. So, and that's just a personal touch, I know Tom, and I wanted to get a couple of those box cars so I could have them operate on the layout. So,
let's go back to something else you said here, Paul. You said, about that expense, but let me tell you, you remember Mad Libs? Remember where you used to fill in the word, like you get a thing, Mad Libs? Yep. I'll give you a Mad Lib, blank apostrophe S expensive, and fill out anything you want in front of that. And it's expensive, right? Every hobby that's anything enjoyable is expensive. Yeah. So, I mean, there's less expensive ways to do it, but ultimately, nobody rides for free. But I do want to ask you, and it goes back to it, talk about expensive, and you talk about these US models that you're able to get your hands on. And we know the struggle that being in Australia, trying to get US stuff and the shipping and the delays. And I'm curious, How about availability as you're building this module for Australian stuff? Does that seem readily available within Australia?
In the last 10 years, local content has exploded. So, certainly in HO, any locomotive you want is pretty much available now, and good quality DCC and sound. Coming out of the same factories that the US models are coming from, and also rolling stock. So, had I been commencing the hobby now, I probably would go straight into New South Wales modelling because there's so much available. And in terms of track, good suppliers here locally and paint. And so I do purchase a lot of my modelling materials locally now online, but my locomotives and that come from US. However, I've pretty much filled my roster. So unless there's something I absolutely love, then not too many more.
You're not done
I've got
yet.
two RS. I've got a couple of Mopac RS3 on pre-order from Bowser, which should be due to be shipped any time now. But I think they've been on pre-order for 2 or 3 years.
Wow.
And that's all I've got. I can't believe it. I usually have a lot more, but yeah, shipping since COVID hit, the shipping prices have probably trebled than what they used to be. So that does limit, although we do have a local supplier who basically we can order through. They ship it from the US in containers, and then we pay a lot less shipping. But there's a time frame in that as well.
Sure.
But yeah, Australian modeling's really taken off now, and there's a lot of local manufacturers that are producing really good stuff.
Is there any brick and mortar hobby shops within New South Wales?
Yeah, there's probably 5 or 6 now. Like everywhere, they're disappearing.
Yeah,
more online. But we do have a good number of hobby shops who support the NMRA, so we try and support them as well. So that there's probably that I know of 6 quite strong model railroad stores still, but they're far and few between.
Well, that's definitely good. And in these shops, are they stocking? Is it U.S. and Australian base model railroading too? So you get a mix of both within that shop.
Get a mix, but some are now probably more Australian than anything else now, as the market's increased locally. Yeah. I think by the NMRA, I think in Australia like 25% model US.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still quite a large number of modelers who model USA.
Yeah.
And then I would say would be Australian and then UK, British layouts as well. And that was the other thing I wasn't talking about. I did present at our convention in Sydney.
Yeah.
And that was, I presented on the Proto Throttle, but also I was on the plenary session about social media. So gave a good talk about Around the Layout podcast and what it means. And I think our big challenge is that, the hobby does have quite a number of seniors in the hobby who are not necessarily into social media. So they're missing out on that, on podcasts. And you and I both know, Ray, that, we've run surveys in the past and quite a number of people don't listen to podcasts, don't even know they exist. And that's one of our challenges in the future is how do we get to those people? People, as you get older and less mobile, things like podcasts are great to be able to listen to, or even when you're out walking. So somehow we need to spread the word about podcasts and, of course, some of the YouTube channels out there. But that was surprising to me. Actually, a number of people came up to me and asked, well, what's a podcast? How do I listen to a podcast?
Right.
And Gary Rooming presented on social media as well. And it was the same type of theme. A lot of people were unaware that they existed. And secondly, how do you actually listen to them? So that's a challenge. I think that's a challenge that we face.
Well, I think it's a on an overall picture, it's always what's the best and most current and effective media to reach an audience. The NMRA is going through that on a national and really international level. And we interviewed Lucy Dorma on the podcast, and she was talking about the platforms that she's trying to use to reach members. And then we just recently interviewed Mike Wheeler and Art Dutra from the Nutmeg division of the NMRA, the local division for my area. And it was the same thing of how do you reach people in a diverse amount of interest in different platforms, and then getting them on their radar. And you and I've had talks at length about podcasting, but I'll be honest, 5 years ago, podcasting wasn't really on my radar. It really started with a buddy of mine, Dave Gardner, and his podcast, and getting that idea, and then looking for podcasts and hearing about other podcasts. But 5 years ago, and I'm not old, I'm not young either, but it wasn't on my radar. So there's a lot of people where that idea of podcasting just isn't there yet. And
Yeah.
I think it's open to everybody. It's simple, it's easy, but it's foreign. So it's getting people to understand what it is, why it is, and ultimately what's the benefit. And I'm hoping that what people have gotten is the benefit you mentioned. I hope it's inspiring. I hope when people hear the stories of other model railroaders and hear what their journey was like and their passions and their desires, I hope that sparks a fire into other people and makes them want to go build something. Like, hearing about you and seeing seeing that it's achievable to them. It's not just something that can be it's not a pipe dream. It's achievable stuff.
I think what I have noticed, though, and it's, I think starting a podcast is difficult enough, and whether or not it's a podcast or a YouTube podcast, very similar, but it's maintaining consistency. There was a lot of channels that I subscribe to that have gone from weekly, then maybe once in a while to none at all. And I see quite a number of ones that I quite enjoy that no longer exist or haven't posted for 3 or 4 months. And I think that's the challenge, that you need to be dedicated, and it's that planning the planning we do to enable that weekly format to be there. I think there's a term for it, Ray, we have discussed, where they just fall away.
Yeah, it's in podcasting, it's called pod fade, but but it could happen in anywhere, like even Facebook groups. I mean, the work that you've put into the Shelf Modelers group, if you're not consistent on it, if you're not consistently putting information into it, so it goes beyond podcasting to websites, to Facebook pages or groups, to anywhere. If you're not consistent with your message and continuously updating it and moving it, it fades away. And I'm glad we've been able to stay consistent with the podcast. But overall, it's and it's just like any other hobby. Just like we find at times where you walk away from the layout for a little bit. Hey, I need a break. As much as we talked about those waves, right? I'm really excited about scratch building, or I'm really excited about this. And then all of a sudden it's like, tonight I'm gonna take a night off and I'm gonna read a book, or I'm gonna go do something else. And it's just like everything else. And then the passion to get back to it. I'm very fortunate to have found the passion within the podcasting. You certainly help fuel that, and the guests and listeners all fuel that. But ultimately, it's it's a passion and in its own hobby to be a part of.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, when the emails that we get and that we share from people providing feedback, that gives you a boost. It makes it all worth it. I mean, the hours you put in for it is certainly not a money making type of exercise. The hours are long, and but the rewards are great when it comes to seeing people and hearing their story. I look forward to it just like any. So in Sydney, I get the release of the podcast on a Tuesday morning. So I commute in the city on a Tuesday, and the highlight of my day is listening to our Around the Layout podcast.
Right.
And, checking for it, making sure there's no errors, although Don seems to hear it before me, and if he finds any errors, he's on to you before I get there. So, but it's great, and I really enjoy. And the other ones, 18 months ago, we didn't even have What's Happening, and having Tony Cook is just such a great benefit. And Tony brings his reputation in the industry. Having Tony on the podcast is just fantastic, and the manufacturers. I've known Jim from Athens for 20 odd years, and to have Jim Wiggins on the podcast occasionally, is great. He's the face of Athens.
Right.
The support we're getting from manufacturers, and for those who are operators, the products that are given up by the manufacturers for us to offer out. That's just fantastic, and I really enjoy those sessions as well.
Yeah, it's been a great hobby, and it's been a great hobby for you to, you're part of that podcasting hobby, and and I certainly appreciate, again, all the support that's provided to the podcast from so many different angles. And again, it's all for just sharing out all this great information and the stories of these people of all walks, and getting their story out there, and hopefully inspiring others to build great layouts. So it's been a real fun journey, and I'm looking forward to more. It's been a blast.
Lots more to come.
Absolutely. So as we're wrapping things up here on this episode of Around the Layout, I want to get back to your Riverbelt line and ask you, you're talking about super detailing. You've got a locomotive. Did the one that Rob Arsenault weathered, is that in your hands yet?
Yes, it arrived on Monday, but I haven't had time yet to program it and set up the proto throttle, but it's just an amazing looking model. So watch out. I'll be posting lots of photos and videos of it. It's just an amazing, the work that Rob did.
Yeah.
I couldn't have done it. So that's why I wanted one from Rob. It's probably the benchmark locomotive for me to aim for.
Yeah.
And I think people should think about that. If you want to get into weathering, there's plenty of people out there, professionals, who can do. So you don't need to do your whole fleet. Just have one done, or a couple of cars, to get as samples for you to use to reach that type of level. And just by looking at the model that Rob did for me, enables me then to upgrade some of my locomotives to similar style.
Yeah.
So that's what I would recommend doing, and that's why I did. I got one locomotive for Rob to do for me, and it's the pride of the fleet. It just looks amazing.
You talked about the things that you're doing. You talk obviously weathering, and what's your next, other than the one for the module? What's your next scratch built building for the Riverbelt line?
Good question. I've got a building that's been there for a while. It was a kit, and I haven't completely finished it. Inside glazing, and it needs things like downpipes and conduits, and to get that real industrial look, and lighting. So that building's probably the next major one to attempt. And for anyone considering lighting, it go and do it. And you don't need to buy expensive. You can buy 10 street lights LED off eBay for like $10, or Amazon. There is so much LED lighting that you can use, very cheap. I bought a 6 amp 12 volt power supply for like $15 delivered, and that will run the whole layout for all the lighting. So that's another layer. Another layer of detail I decided to do, and the night shots are just incredible that come out of that. I don't run them all the time, but when I wanted to set a night scene, I use the lighting, and it amazes people. If you really want to impress someone of your layout, take them in there, turn the lights off with your room lights off, and just have the layout running with the lighting you put on, and it's real wow factor. So that's my next project.
Yeah, you've got quite a bit going with your Riverbelt line, and obviously the help that you're giving me here in the podcast and the Shelf Modelers Group, and your involvement with the local NMRA, and then now you're talking about modular building. You keep yourself very busy within the model railroading hobby. So I'm glad you took some time out here to get us up to date. We talk often, but we don't get to talk often on air. So it was good to have you back and get an update from you, Paul. So
So is this when I ask for my wage rise?
We're going to edit that part out. I don't think there's any. You do an outstanding job, and I'll double your salary right now. How's that
Oh,
sound?
thanks. Oh, okay. That's fantastic. And I'll come over there and sweep your office when you're finished.
There you go.
As well.
There we go. Paul, great having you on the show.
Always a pleasure, Ray, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.
Feel like doing something more exciting this summer? Think Australian. Come on into Outback Steakhouse and try 3 meals at just $9.95 each, like our honey Dijon chicken, our signature sirloin and grilled shrimp on the barbie, or our classic Outback special. Live adventurous. Go Outback.